Well, the power sector refinancing bond is the focus of the conversation I'll be having now with Michael Famaruti, an economist with Vertiva Capital Management. Good morning, Michael.
Morning, Harry. Thank you for having me today.
It's great to have you on the program. What do you make of the AFDB's plans to invest in new refinancing bonds for the power sector? Listening to the conversation that Boson had with the AFDB president.
Okay, I think the first thing is that the comments are not too surprising. We recall that when he first took the presidency of the AFDB, power was one of the primary focuses that he mentioned. And I think there's a clear intent to go forward on that. The idea of a power bond is not something that is too novel, but it is a unique way of trying to solve the funding gaps that have kind of come about this year.
But you remember that earlier this year, the House of Representatives actually kicked against the raising of this particular bond. They felt that they had to address, that there was need to address most of the issues that had been raised in the sector, kind of plug the leakages before going ahead to raise this bond. For you, do you think those issues have been addressed to the extent that the federal government should again revisit the option of raising a power bond?
Okay, so the first principle for the power bond is that the projects themselves have to be viable. And I think the reality on ground right now is not too many projects would be seen as bankable because of those leakages that have probably not yet been dealt with. So the power sector has a very checkered history, pre and post. And even in the last year and a bit, there have been hitches still. So there's still a sense that those leakages and those challenges that the sector continues to face haven't yet been solved. And the reality is those need to be fixed before the proposed investment will provide the sort of jolts that the sector needs.
Well, right now, I know that the Minister for Power, Works and Housing is having a lot of sleepless nights along with his ministry. So one of the main challenges that we already know is that they have funding issues. For you, if raising a bond can be done now, what would be the most appropriate solutions for power firms that's for the distribution companies, the GENCOs, and of course the transmission company?
Sorry, please, can you take that again?
Right now, I know that the Minister of Power, Works and Housing and of course, the rest of the ministry having sleepless nights because of the constant issues facing the discos, that's the distribution companies, the generation companies, and of course, transmission company, because their major challenge right now is funds. So if there is no plan to just go ahead with, floating of this particular power bond, what other solutions or what other options can be looked at this time for this very critical sector?
Okay, so the bonds are definitely a medium-term possibility. They will provide some respite, but in the meantime, the minister needs to focus on solving the legacy problems that have plagued the sector post-privatization. So ensuring that the transmission is working properly and GENCOs are able to get power to discos, and the resultant distribution goes smoothly. I think those transmission problems are issues that have been perennial and they plague the sector, and until those legacy problems are fixed, the power bond will not have the sort of effect that it could. So whilst it is something that they should definitely consider going forward, it is still very important that they address the ongoing legacy problems that they seem to have identified themselves and are working towards anyway.
So, Michael, there's been, plenty of conversations with regards that particular sector, and there's also been allegations of diversion of funds. Now, in trying to address that, what kind of structure do you think the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company needs to come up with at this time to, for instance, if it actually is true, limit the diversion of funds, or begin to think of how best they can trap these funds and use it in the way that is actually required?
Okay. Well, I think the main things that are required are transparency and proper incentives. So in terms of the way funds are handled, received, and managed, then there needs to be more transparency. But also in terms of the value chain from the GenCos to the DISCOs, there needs to be more transparency as to how that process is going on. The other thing is incentives. So as long as structures are put in place to promote good behavior, you go some way to plug in those leakages. So it's up to the minister to identify the particular problems that are kind of being faced by the NERC and look at ways of providing the proper platform for incentives to promote good behavior there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the value chain, and to ensure liquidity and assure a renewable payment system along this power sector value chain. What would you propose should form the liquidity and payment support mechanism?
Well, so if you look at the budget, there's clearly a lot of allowance for power works and housing, and there needs to be a prioritization of ongoing projects, ongoing plans, and there needs to be an assurance that those projects will continue receiving payments and continue getting funding, even if it's coming from a power bond that is going to help refinance these projects. So the priority has to be in maintaining the work that has already started or reviving those that have been abandoned in the recent past, and ensuring that liquidity for that is constant and is coming in, because we've seen too many policy reversals and too many projects that have stayed on longer than they should have because of liquidity drying up at some point.
So, Michael, for you, taking a look at your short to medium term expectations now for the power sector, what do you hope to see? We're already coasting to the end of the year. This is the last quarter for 2016. Of course, already the 3-year expenditure plan for the country has been sent to the National Assembly, as said yesterday by the President. So we already have a plan, a working plan, so to speak. What do you expect to see for and from the power sector?
Okay, like I mentioned before, this year we've already had challenges in terms of power generation. There hasn't been a market improvement from the past, which has been slightly disappointing, but represents the depth of the problems facing the sector. In terms of going forward, as you mentioned, this is the final quarter of the year. President has been on record stating that about 700 or so billion naira has capital spending, and one would suspect that a decent chunk of that has gone to power. Okay. So the expectation is going into 2017, we begin to see some dividends from the spending in the sector.
But how soon are you expecting to see that? In the first quarter, first half?
Well, it comes down to how efficient the disbursement and execution process is. So far, we've been a bit disappointed by the slow pace of policy execution, so that does dampen expectations a bit. So it's unclear, but it would really depend on how quickly they're able to return to work on those projects.
Michael, thank you so much for joining me on the program this morning and sharing your perspectives with us.
Thank you very much.